So even though The Rock was a wrestler for like a day, he is still considered one of the best ever. This likely suggests he was pretty good. Just a thought. We all do hope that one day he returns for one last match, although that window is closing, but either way, the Great One will be in the Hall of Fame eventually, and cap off an all-time career. Which means we should talk about him. So I am Simon Miller. Please do hit that subscribe button. And this is 10 fascinating WWE backstage facts about The Rock. Number 10, wrestling left him totally broke. So much so, he almost quit. It is kind of different now, but back in the mid-90s, if you weren't at the top of the chain, you weren't earning that much money. It was a proper, well, I better sleep in my car life, and Dwayne Johnson felt so despondent with it after a while, he called then industry bigwig J.J. Dillon and begged to be brought into the big leagues. This is where The Rock's famous $7 in my pocket story comes from, and you'd have to assume if he didn't get his break, he could have walked away. The man was certainly considering it. Thankfully, Dillon lit a fire under his ass and promised the good times were coming, and he wasn't wrong, was he? Goes to show how many other legendary figures we may have lost along the way too. You do have to be able to eat. Number 9, he refused to work with Shawn Michaels. Or so it is said, but look, did they ever wrestle? No, they did not. The real interesting part of this story is that The Rock worked with everyone. Didn't really care if he lost either, because he knew if he got a microphone the following week, he could get himself back over. It was pretty damn refreshing, to be honest. A nice contrast to all that, well, it doesn't work for me, brother. It's why most assumed eventually we would get The Rock versus Shawn Michaels, as that was a top-tier match. Even Chris Jericho has weighed in on this. The rumors are that back in the day, HBK had gone out of his way to stop any sort of push for Dwayne Johnson, and that maybe there was a situation in Hawaii with The Rock's family, even before the man himself had broken into the business. More recently, both have been very complimentary of each other, so this feels like water under the bridge, and even in a recent interview, Michaels was all like, look, I used to be a little bit of a dick, and I'm sorry. There does seem to be a little bit of smoke and fire to this one, however. That's also why you should always be nice to people. You just never know. Number 8, his original name was Flex Kavana. So we do laugh, but let's face it, if he was brought into NXT right now, that would be his name. It's the most NXT thing ever. As we're here, I want to point out that if I ever get into the system, I would like to be Derek Manpower, so please leave that one free. But there was a reason for this. The Rock wanted to be his own man. This is due to the fact he was a third-generation wrestler and had father Rocky Johnson and grandfather Peter Maivia before him. So however he could stay away from that, the better. This is why we chose Flex Kavana. I'm not sure that guy is ever going to main event WrestleMania. It didn't work out at all because as soon as he was in front of Vince McMahon, he was dubbed Rocky Maivia, which was as if his family legacy had thrown up over him. Can't argue it though. If we don't do that, we likely don't get the Rock moniker. So it all worked out very well. Number 7, D'Lo Brown's head wiggle was based on The Rock. Well, who knew that? I still do the D'Lo head wiggle today because it's one of the best taunts ever, but according to Brown, this was all after he spent some time with the People's Champion. Speaking on the Attitude Era podcast, D'Lo mentioned that after a long drive, him and roommate Dwayne Johnson couldn't sleep. Instead, they decided to watch the movie Friday with Chris Tucker, because why not? They soon got to the scene where Tucker shakes his skull while shouting, "You got knocked the flub out," and that must have entered into Brown's brain. Because the next night when they were in a match together, D'Lo went mad with his head, shouted this line at The Rock, and as soon as Vincent Kennedy McMahon saw it, bam! He was told to do it all the time. So whether or not the most electrifying man had a proper hand in it is up for debate, but without that film, and without their relationship, could be a very different story. Number 6, the Stone Cold Stunner bets. So this is a forever debate. Who sold the Stone Cold Stunner the best? The Rock, of course, gets mentioned a lot because that dude went so over the top with it. It was like his body had become a spring and he couldn't control himself anymore. As it turns out, there was a reason for this. Because The Rock and Stone Cold was a feud for the ages, they worked together a lot. And after a while, they struck a deal where the Rattlesnake would buy a case of beer for Rocky if he could continually find ways to outdo what he'd already done. It worked the other way too, in the sense if Johnson failed at this, he had to do the buying of beer. And The Rock talked about this in 2017, so it's true. And you wonder why by the end it was borderline farcical. I do like the fact this was being done to make other people laugh, though. That is proper warm and fuzzy in your tum-tum stuff. Number 5, Kurt Angle accidentally made him drink soured milk, which is just what you want when you are wrestling. It does kind of tie into Stone Cold, who would often use the beer bath as some sort of signature attack and celebration. So when Kurt Angle entered into a feud with The Rock, everybody thought we could have some fun with it. Therefore, the Olympic gold medalist would start spraying people with milk, which sounds absolutely terrible out of context. It did lead to Angle offering Mr. Just Bring It a calcium beverage after one of their matches, and there was one small issue. Nobody had mentioned that said carton had been sitting out for days, so when The Rock went to drink it, must have tasted like feet. To make it worse, it curdled, so that got spat out instantly. And wrestling, eh? It's really weird. Number 4, he nearly played Willy Wonka. So I will take this one with a pinch of salt because when it comes to Hollywood, there's more rumors than wrestling. Just goes off. When Tim Burton was remaking Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in the early 2000s though, one of the people reached out for this role was The Rock. Now, Dwayne Johnson has discussed this on his Instagram, so there must be some truth to it. And for those date mathematicians out there, if this is accurate, it's before Rocky had actually made his big breakthrough. It's quite the risk. As we know, eventually Johnny Depp got the role, and even Johnson admits this wouldn't have been the best move. He just wasn't the right choice. Do I want to see this now, though? Yes, I do. Especially because The Rock is a giant man now as well. I mean, I'm not sure I ever envisioned Willy Wonka as being super jacked. Now I can't get it out of my head. Number 3, he once got a writer to insult Triple H to his face. This story is the best, and for the greatest account of it, I strongly suggest you pick up Brian Gewirtz's book. It is such a good read. He was The Rock's right-hand man back then and today, though. And one day when they were working on promos together, Brian came up with a great idea. Why doesn't the Great One go out there and mimic the way Triple H talks? This was around the 2000s, and if you were watching then, you know the game liked to speak like a this, and he would take his time, That was just perfect fodder for The Rock. This required sign-off, so they went to see Vince McMahon, and who else was in the office? That's right, Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Johnson still launched into his pitch, but when they got to the impersonation, he turned to Gewirtz and told him to do it live and in person. Brian obviously froze because this was terrifying, but when it was clear there was no choice, he actually did it with Triple H stood right there. I bet that was really fun. It got the Vince laugh, so it was happening, but by all accounts, Triple H was not happy about this. He stared a hole through Brian's face. I love it. Number 2, he broke a Rolex during a promo. Whoops. We all know that Dwayne Johnson became a mega success quite quickly, and when the money did start rolling in, he bought himself a Rolex. Proper Ric Flair logic this. Want to be accepted as a star, make sure you dress like one too. I can only imagine how over the moon he must have been, but as The Rock revealed during an interview with Oprah, the first time he wore it to the ring for a promo, he broke it. I don't believe this is good. It's due to the fact, like all WWE shows, it soon broke down into a big fight, and as soon as the fist started to fly, the watch came off, as Johnson helplessly saw it get crushed by somebody else's foot. Cue the broken heart. It did teach him a valuable lesson, and this is a bit like Kurt Angle and his medals. Incredibly, he was using the real Olympic trinkets for a while, until a fan stole one. Surprisingly, he never did that again. Number 1, he wouldn't ride with the Godfather, because of his smoking habits. Yep. If somehow you don't know when it comes to wrestling, you travel more than you actually get in the ring, so you've got to find a good riding partner. As The Rock and the Godfather were both in the nation, it made sense they'd give this a go, and it did not work. This is because the real-life Charles Wright loved to smoke marijuana, and as he said in many a podcast, as soon as the car door was closed, he would light up. This was his jam. It wasn't even that Dwayne Johnson cared about him doing it, but as his star was on the rise, his media appearances increased, and he found he was turning up for these smelling of weed. Not sure that's going to help. After one interviewer actually asked Rocky if he had been having a good time prior to their chat, that was that. He told Wright their days as travel buddies were over. Something tells me the Godfather didn't care. I mean, I bet he would have chosen the roll-ups anyway. Do you have any more fascinating WWE backstage facts about The Rock? Well, I think you should let us know in the comments below before you like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Then you can head over to whatculture.com where you can read articles like this with your eyes. You can come follow us on social media at WhatCultureWWE and Simon316. And if you would like to watch more videos, I'd appreciate it. They'll be on the screen right now. My name is Simon from What Culture. Thank you very much for joining me as always. And remember that I'm in your pocket and I'm watching you, which is meant to be supportive and not creepy. Goodbye.